everybody. So I had a blast talking with Laura Piper Lee. This book is a little bit more spicy, so we do bring up some more mature topics. And if that's not for you, then this might not be the episode for you. But it's pretty tame. But just thought I'd give a little warning that we talk about some more mature topics in this one. So there you go. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. And we are really excited today. We have another author with us. We love talking with authors on this podcast. And today we are talking with Laura Piper Lee, whose new book, ZOE Brennan, First Crush, is about to come out. And Laura, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love talking rom-coms and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So what inspired you to start writing? How did you get into it?
I was one of those kids that always wrote. I was writing books and doing all the pictures and things like that when I was really little. And I remember writing like plays that I would make my cousin act out with me for my grandparents, who were very lovely people. I mean, these were not high quality performances by any stretch, but they indulged young writer Laura. And so that went a long way. And so I kind of always wrote. And then I stopped because I wanted to, make money as a career, and not be like a struggling artist the way my mom was. She was a legit like painting artist. And I was like, nope, I got to pay the bills. So I'm not doing that. And so I quit for a really long time. And then, and I actually became an attorney. And it was the year, I would say like the year after law school, I just was like, I have this idea for a story. I'm just going to do this for relaxing purposes. Like, I just need to like take a load off and write this silly story, kind of thing. So I got back into it pretty much the moment I started practicing law and had a safe career that was providing for my family. And then I was able to start writing again.
You have this idea, you wrote your first book, and how did you then get it published? What's the process like?
Well, so that book never will see the light of day.
Okay.
And I've had quite a lot of plot twists in my own writing career, because when I started writing, I was writing middle grade fantasy novels.
Oh, wow.
So like fantasy novels for kids. And that first book that I started writing, I think took me about 7 years to write. Because I really didn't know what I was doing. It was like a 300,000 word epic, I mean, it was crazy. That book was insane. But it was the book that got me writing again. And every book I've wrote after that has been much better and much shorter in a decent range. And so what happened was the last couple, I got my literary agent for a middle grade science fiction novel, actually a dystopian novel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's what I got my literary representation for. And the next two novels I wrote were both middle grade, either sci-fi or fantasy, and they would go on submission to publishers and they would get close. Like they'd go through acquisitions, but then not make it. And that's the point where, the editorial team has decided, we want to buy this book. And then they present it to the sales team, and the sales team says, you'll never make this book. This book will make no money. Like, we are not buying this book. So I would get to that point. And then have to be told no, And my last book, my last middle grade fantasy was, it was called Evil Baby Wizards. So to give you an idea, like these are comedic, children's novels. That one went to acquisitions 4 times. So like got really close to publishing 4 times. And after that last time didn't happen, my agent was like, you know what? You need to chill. Like, you need a break. Like, this was traumatic. You need to write. And by the way, I think that you would be perfect for writing adult rom-coms. And I remember just laughing in her face, like just be like, what? Like, every idea I've had has been of evil baby wizard type, right? Like, not right. And I loved romance and I read it. I've always been a romance fan, but I didn't think that I had those ideas.
Yeah.
And literally,
how did she think you even know to suggest that to you? Had you had conversations with her about it, or?
I think she just knows me as a person, and I'm really chatty. And like my children's novels are all very fun and full of banter. And there were some parents that I think in the last novel I'd written, that she was like, I'm kind of interested in this parents. They've got a vibe. Like they really like, and I think that was part of what did it.
Yeah.
Because she's like, I really think that like if you just aged up the content, your humor is perfect for a rom-com. It's so playful and fun. And so I just remembered thinking like, in what world? And I went to bed that night and I remember telling her like, okay, if I have an idea, I'll let you know, and like laughed. And then I totally dreamt up the plot of my first book, Hannah Tate Beyond Repair, that night. Like literally woke up in the middle of the night, was like, oh my God, that would be a great plot, wrote it down, pitched it to my agent. The next morning, she was like, yes, write that. And so I went away and wrote like the first couple chapters that same weekend, and they did not change. Like they are almost the same exact chapters I wrote in the final published version of that novel. So I kind of feel like the universe was like, all right, Laura, we were trying to wait for you to figure it out, that you're not a children's book author and that you should be writing rom-coms, but fine, we'll just hit you over the head with it, blunt force, and send you on your way. And I've been writing romances ever since.
Ho, ho, ho. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch-alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind-the-scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/Hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
So do you enjoy the process of writing the rom-com?
Yes. And I sold it very rarely. This very rarely happens for nobodies, but I sold it on proposal, meaning I wrote the first 5 chapters and a synopsis, and the publisher bought it based on that. And ironically, that bought it was an editor that tried to buy Evil Baby Wizards. So she already knew that I could write a full-length funny book. And then she lost her job, started acquiring romance. We were like, oh, perfect timing. We submitted it to her, and she's the one who bought my debut novel. And so so I got to write that first romance, with a book deal in hand. And that felt so good. I was probably what I needed for my soul to know that this book has a home already. I'm not going to like get to the end of a 2-year-long writing journey only for it to get close and not make it. So I actually just really enjoyed writing that first one. Now, ZOE Brennan's my second, and I did not enjoy writing this very much at times. But that's just because I was so busy with the first book and like promoting it and doing events and things like that, that I just, I'm still a full-time attorney and I have a child. And so it was just like madness, but I do love ZOE Brennan, and it did turn out to be great and very fun and funny too. It's just, it also took some years off my life.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, would you say you're a pantser or a plotter when you write?
Oh, definitely a plotter. If I don't have a way, like a plan in front of me, I will write a 300,000 word long epic, it'll just meander.
Yeah.
So
I guess you have to be a plotter if you're doing evil wizard babies.
Yeah.
Books.
I needed to know what I needed to know all about those evil wizard babies and what they were up to, how they could be defeated,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so your first book was not a queer love story, right?
The main character, the female main character, is bisexual, but she ends up with a guy.
Okay.
And her friends she's part of a queer friend group.
Okay.
And she meets the protagonist, ZOE Brennan, in that first book too.
Oh.
So she kind of gets adopted by this queer community. in the mountains when she moves up there to take care of her parents. And so both of my books are set in Blue Ridge, Georgia. They're both like small mountain romances. It's just the first character ends up with a guy, and then in this one, she's a lesbian, so she ends up with a woman.
Right, right. That's cool. Is there a reason why you set your books in that place?
Yeah, it's where my folks live. Like that's where
Okay.
yeah. And it's funny because I'm always like, the dream, it came to me in a dream, but it's actually very close to my real life. My folks bought a dilapidated cabin in the mountains of Blue Ridge, Georgia, with like they had almost nothing saved for retirement, like, and they used all their money to buy this fixer-upper cabin, with the idea that they would rent out the half of it as an Airbnb to like give them retirement income. And so I helped them renovate the cabin, set it up as an Airbnb, and all of that. And in the book, Hannah Tate, it's the same thing, like very wacky country parents, kind of irresponsible. She goes and helps them renovate the Airbnb with the help of a hot carpenter who lives next door.
Nice.
Romance math, you know? And yeah, and then she runs an Airbnb. So that part of it was like very drawn from my personal life. And because I love Blue Ridge, it's a beautiful town. It's a weird place and it's full of characters. So it's like just not even hard to write comedy there because everyone you meet in Blue Ridge has a story, and they're just a really funny, like kind of mean but loving group.
Yeah.
They will make fun of you to your face, kind of mountain people. And I'm from Georgia, you know, so I enjoy writing about where I'm from and showcasing like real Southern people who like the bless your heart as an insult Southern people, you know?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's type that you look terrible, bless your heart.
Yeah, it's like, oh, have you been eating enough? Too much? Like, you know, like they just are constantly insulting you at every step of the way.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about ZOE Brennan, First Crush? Tell them just a little bit about what it's about.
So ZOE Brennan is a workaholic. She has been super unlucky in love. She's a lesbian in a small mountain town. There's not a huge queer group of people for her to, and she has dated them all, you know, it's one of those, and I feel like that's a very common thing in queer communities in small towns where like everybody just trades partners until you find a pairing that works. And so everyone's kind of dated everyone just because you don't have a lot of options. And she's dated everyone. They all end up with each other and not her. And so she just pours herself into her family's vineyard. That's a struggling small vineyard, really operates like season to season. Even though it's beloved and a very good vineyard, it's an expensive business to run. And it's her family's vineyard, and she's very attached to it. And so there's this wine festival that's coming to town, and they do a local showcase on a vineyard. And she's like, this is going to break us out. Like, this is it. This is our chance to break out of this season to season situation. And so she's determined to win this local showcase spot. But then she finds out her father has to leave the country indefinitely to take care of his sick mother in Italy. And he's the vintner. He makes the wine. So she's sort of left without a vintner right on the edge of this major opportunity. And she's really depressed and ends up going out with this longtime friends with benefits person, and who convinces her that the answer to her problems is to participate in a blindfolded threesome. My book is spicy. Okay, this happens in chapter 2.
Yes.
So, you know, when you're depressed, that's what you do, I guess. Like you go do this, you know, kind of crazy thing. And after she has just the best time of her life, the blindfolds come off and she realizes that the stranger she did not know under the blindfold is actually her first crush, Lane Woods, who is the older sister of Zoe's best friend growing up. So Zoe is like pined after her for her whole life. But Lane left and went to Napa and was a vintner out there, and she has come back to Blue Ridge. And Zoe's just mortified. Like, she's like, oh my God, I just slept with my childhood crush. And Zoe finds out the next day that the reason Lane Woods is back in town is because Zoe's dad has hired her to replace him as the vintner for their family vineyard. So she just slept with her childhood crush, and then she shows up the next day and is like, hey, I work here now. And I wanted to like explore what it's like when you idolize somebody and you're infatuated and you really have this major crush on them, but then when you get to know them, they're not what you thought. And Lane has just a massive chip on her shoulder about coming back to Blue Ridge. She didn't want to do it, but her own career has been suffering out west. And she kind of comes in like an arrogant, butthole. Like she doesn't want to work for ZOE. She doesn't want to work for the small vineyard. She thinks it's below her. And so these two, like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I've been in love with you my whole life. Oh, I accidentally slept with you. Oh no, now you work here. And oh no, I realize you're kind of awful. And so, but they have to work together to win that festival. And so it's really fun because they're totally at odds until they kind of get over their stuff and start working together. And first comes kind of a friendship, and then it progresses from there. So it's not enemies to lover, like nobody's holding a knife to anyone's throat, but it's definitely like, I kind of hate your guts to lovers. With all that historical baggage in the background.
So my best friend's brother, in this case, best friend's sister, trope that's like really popular in romance novels. So that was the kind of another thing explored.
Yeah, and I think that's something, part of the reason it's so popular, it's something that a lot of us can relate to. Like, because when you had a best friend and you went over to their house, their siblings were there and you got to see them in a more intimate way, right?
Yeah.
Like than you would at school. And it allows for these like, these crushes on older kids to occur, which is exactly what happened to ZOE. Like she was best friends with Rachel and she'd go over to the house and just realize that she was actually queer, as she fell in love with her older sister. And part of the twist on that trope that I did, it's not only that it's my best friend's older sister, it's my ex-best friend's older sister, because Rachel and ZOE had a massive falling out. They're the heads of rival vineyards. And Rachel is awful and is also, she's kind of a villain of book 2 of the ZOE book. And so that's also fun because, man, when your enemy is already like just does not like you, and then you start messing around with her older sister, like it's a lot of family drama, and that was a lot of fun.
Hey, this is David from the Piecing It Together podcast, a podcast about movies and the movies that inspire them. For over 4 years, each week, a guest and I take a look at a new movie through the lens of what other movies we think were either an influence or connect in some other way. It's a fun, unique way to discuss films that leads to a great list of other movies to check out that either explore the same themes and ideas or maybe utilize similar filmmaking techniques. Including special episodes in our side series that twist the format, we've done over 200 episodes, so there's bound to be one on a film you've been thinking about and want to dig deeper into. So check us out on all the major podcasting apps and at piecingpod.com.
One thing I thought was interesting about the book is that it's obviously a pretty sexy book, but I thought it was interesting how traditional it also was. Like you talk a lot about courtship and that her wanting a courtship experience, and that was like a theme of the book. What was your thoughts kind of about that aspect?
I think that ZOE, who's used to being like hooking up with people and then being set aside, I think that's what she knows and that's what she's more comfortable with, even though it's not enough to feed her like romantically and feed her soul. And so when Lane and her start having feelings for each other and start vibing, ZOE's like, all right, this is just sexual. This isn't real. And that's a way of protecting her heart, to kind of keep Lane at that arm's length distance. Like, okay, yes, of course you want to have, you want to sleep together. That's what everyone wants from me. No one else wants a relationship. Why would you? And Lane picks up on all of that and is just like, I do really like you, and I'm not going to let you write us off as something just physical. And I'm going to court you. I'm going to woo you until you believe me that I'm really here for the romance and I'm really here for you. And I'm not just here to have sex and move on. And I think ZOE needed that. Like she needed to be proved to, in order for her to really be able to open up her heart, because she's just been protecting herself for so long. So that's kind of where that came from. Also, my great uncle, like, so I'm from Georgia, like I've got very Southern, like everyone's super Southern. And my great uncle once told me that the secret to his marriage, that it was like going on like 70 years at that point when he gave me this advice, was always know your ABCs, always be courting. And so he told me how, like, you know, he would take my aunt out every morning for breakfast and he'd bring her a rose, or, you know, he was like, the problem in so many relationships is that people forget to show love and forget to show how they really feel. And that aspect of romance has to be tended to like a garden, or else you become roommates, and things get really commonplace. And so I really thought that advice from my great uncle was like super spot on. And I wanted Lane to have that same perspective on relationships. And she does. She woos the hell out of Zoe. Like, she is a romantic person. And it was very fun to like knock Zoe off her feet with Lane.
Well, it's just nice with like a queer love story to have those traditional elements. It's oddly refreshing.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's like a misconception about queer folks, especially in the South, is that there's like this automatic, if you're queer, you're also super liberal and all of these, like, and not just liberal, I don't mean like necessarily in a political way, but I mean in like a life way, like you're progressing past, you know, old relationship norms and things like that. But, you know, queer people in the South are still raised by older Southern people, right? Like, we're still raised by the same people. Like my grandparents were super genteel. Like my grandfather was like the ultimate Southern gentleman, you know, and like being raised by that, even with my own queer, like I still got those ideals from my family that were kind of passed down about how to treat each other. Even though I have a wider array of like potential partners, you know? And so I wanted to give Lane and Zoe those kind of vibes too. Like, you know, we're still Southern, even though we also are queer.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I also thought it was interesting that the very beginning of the book, you said that most queer folks have the same set of core stories. What do you mean by that?
I just mean, like, anytime you meet, like anytime you're getting to know other queer folks and you're forming those friendships, there's these core stories that everybody has. And some of them are very sad, you know, like the first homophobia they ever experienced, or the first time they were outed. Or there's always like the coming out story. How did you come out? How did your parents take it? It's like this sort of shared set of traumatic experiences. But then there's also really lovely core stories. And that's what Zoe says. She's like, of these core stories that everybody has, my favorite was always, you know, who was the first person that you like fell for? You know, who was the person who showed you a different way of being? Like the first queer person you ever noted. And then also the first person that you ever fell for. And so, and she talks about it like being like the first lesbian, the alpha queer, the one that made me gay. Like, and that person for her was Lane Woods, you know, this older, because Lane was outed in high school as a lesbian. And Zoe was like, you know, in awe because she was still in the closet. And she was in awe of Lane and how she just owned it, you know, and took it in stride. And so she was this mentor for her as well, without even knowing it, you know. And so that's what I meant by the core stories. It's like, that's a fun core story.
Another part that I really appreciated was when Zoe admits that she has never been in a relationship before. And I think that you don't tend to see that in characters that are a little bit older, you know, like, but I think there's a lot of, especially women, who have never had a relationship and are kind of embarrassed about that.
I think it's so common, especially in today's age, where, and this is something the way Zoe said, like, you know, where situationships kind of peter into existence and you don't ever like say, oh, we're dating, you know, and then they just sort of peter back out, right? And so having like a long-term relationship is not easy in the way, like, I feel like dating has been commodified, you know, like with apps and stuff like that now. So I wanted Zoe to sort of be like a fish out of water in a sense, especially when Lane is like approaching her with more of an old-fashioned, I'm going to court you. We're not going to have sex. You can't get me out of your system. I won't let you do it because I really like you and you need to believe it. And so that was also kind of like part of the romance for me was like somebody negating the way things have become and being like, no, I'm going to treat you right. And we're going to figure this out together as a relationship.
Yeah.
I loved that for Zoe. I love that somebody forced her to, to believe that could be, that could happen for her.
Yeah. Yeah, I did too. And so how did you decide on these? So you had Zoe in the first book, and how did you develop these characters? What was that process like?
I missed part of that question. So you said
for Zoe and Lane, like what was the character development process like for you? How did you? I know Zoe was in the first book, but what was that like?
Well, the funny thing was is that I always thought Hannah Tate Beyond Repair was a standalone. I did not intend to write a second book in Blue Ridge. And so Zoe was actually the only single character in the whole book one. Like everyone else was already paired off. And so, and she already had her struggles. She was already set up as a character in that book. But then my publisher was like, we want a Zoe book. Like that's what we want next. And it's funny because if I had known that I was going to write a Zoe book, I don't think I would have made her the head of a vineyard, because I did not know anything about wine other than I liked it. It tasted good, I had no wine knowledge. And so I had to learn so much, and not just about wine itself, but how to make wine and how a vineyard works. And then I had to learn all of that over again, how it's done in Georgia, because the way you grow grapes in Blue Ridge, very different than the way you grow grapes in California or the Finger Lakes or wherever. So just a massive learning curve there, like for me to learn all of that stuff. But as far as like coming up with the characters, I knew who Zoe was. I knew that she was jaded and had been used a lot, and felt like she'd been used a lot. And I thought, like, who's going to have the power to kind of cut through all her BS? Like, who's going to get to her? And then I thought of Lane. Like, I thought of, like this person that came back from her past, that Zoe had always idolized. And then just with the power of like determination, basically, woos Zoe and kind of lures her out of like the walls that she built to protect herself all those years. Because Lane is kind of a force. Like she's a very charismatic, she's bossy, she's hot. Like she's you can't, she was very arrogant coming in, but then when that's turned to good, it's like, whew, she's kind of hard to say no to for Zoe. So Zoe's a strong-willed character. I had to give her someone even stronger to break her down.
Yeah. Well, if you were going to give a pitch to the listeners why they should check out this book, why they should read it, what would you say?
I would say, especially since it's the Hallmarkies podcast, that if you love Hallmark, I mean, this is a classic Hallmark setup, in my opinion. You've got like a competition that a small business owner who's struggling is fighting for, and ends up hiring somebody that she's had a fling with in the past, and now they have to work together and they're at odds to win this competition. I think that is like such a classic Hallmark setup. So if you love Hallmark, but you wish it were sapphic with two women together and also very spicy, then this is the book for you, because I feel like it brings all the heartfelt coziness of a Hallmark movie that, like those cozy, those sweet little swoony heart swells that Hallmark movies do so well. It has all of that, especially when Lane courting Zoe and like they're taking it slow, but then once they kind of break each other down and get past their stuff, it keeps going, right? It doesn't stop when a normal Hallmark movie stops. And so I think that if you want like the Hallmark experience plus,
yeah,
here you go.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, hearty, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies.
Well, we have some fun rapid fire get to know you questions we like to end the interview with. So first is, what's the best ice cream flavor?
Oh my gosh. Chocolate chip cookie dough. As long as there's
Okay.
big hunks of cookie dough.
Oh, okay, good. What's your favorite color?
Green.
Okay, that's on Hallmark color. Good. What music are you into right now?
I've been listening to a lot of Doechii
Oh, I haven't heard of
and
that.
also Chapel Rowan. When she came out with Red, like the newest album, and there was a song called Red Wine Supernova, I was like, oh God, it's the official anthem of ZOE Brennan First Crush, since I did red wine like nonstop in this book.
Yeah. Okay. What is your go-to date night food?
Sushi.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's very neat. You're not going to get messy. That's a big key for me. It has to be. All right. What's your go-to date night activity if you're going out doing something?
I really love like going out for a meal and then going somewhere pretty for a walk. And so I live in Philadelphia now. And so I love going out for like a really good dinner and then going to like the riverside and just walking and having a chance to talk. I always think that like movies, I mean, I love seeing movies, but if you're on a date, like you need to be able to chat and get to know each other. And so I like having the ability to have a conversation at the same time.
We always say in this podcast is, if you're doing the movie date, you do the movie, you don't do dinner and a movie, you do movie and dinner. So then you talk about the movie.
Yeah, that's much better order of operations.
Yeah. Or, I mean, that's a pretty long date. You could just do movie and ice cream or drinks or whatever, something shorter. Very good. Okay. Let's see. Which do you like better, dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Okay. Which do you like better, beaches or mountains?
That's a hard one for me. I'm gonna say beaches only because I've had my fill of mountain. Like I have the mountain experience regularly from where my folks are, and I love mountains, but especially because to me, I go to the beach when I'm freezing cold here, and I go to a beach that is warm, so it gets me out of that seasonal funk. So I got to go with beaches.
Yeah. Same with me. I'm exactly the same because I'm here in Utah, so I'm around mountains all the time. But I miss the beach so much. All right, what's your favorite holiday to celebrate?
Oh, Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I do also really love Halloween, so I'm gonna say Christmas because it lasts longer. But I do love Halloween,
especially in Hallmark world. We start like early October these days.
I know. I love how long I mean, that's one thing where I'm like, all right, I know that Christmas has gotten super commercial, y'all, but now it lasts so much longer. And I love that. I still have my tree up. I haven't even taken it down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are keeping it up later this year because Christmas started so much later because Thanksgiving was late.
Right. And I mean,
it wasn't
like I only have my office one up. So the real one came down. But the office one is an artificial tree. So it's like, it's so happy and cheerful. And I'm in here to work and, might as well have some more pretty lights for a while.
Oh, you could write a Christmas romance.
I want to. My favorite ever is Just Like Magic by Sarah Hogel. They have not made a movie out of it. It's a rom-com book. But it is so good that until I have an idea that I think is like as good or like approaching that one, I'm waiting. But I hope. I love a good Christmas rom-com, especially if there's magic involved. Like Christmas magic stories, love it.
What's that one called?
Just Like Magic. So the premise is,
I'll have to read it.
This horrible influencer who's like washed up and broke accidentally summons the holiday spirit who goes by Hall, and he's a hot guy. And he's supposed to be like teaching her lessons, right? Like about the meaning of Christmas. But she's terrible. So she uses his magic for ill. And so, but he like slowly gets to her, but she also kind of slowly gets to him. But like using Christmas magic to mess with her enemies, hilarious.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I'll have to check that out. Good. Yeah. Well, last question is, what is your favorite Hallmark or romantic movie?
Oh gosh. I don't know that I have a favorite Hallmark one. I like this was recommended to me recently, but An American in Austin, like it was one of the Austin movies. That one's super fun.
That was definitely one of the best that Hallmark made last year. I really enjoyed it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, so I love
you'll love
Austen stuff. Yeah. So that would be my favorite Hallmark. And as far as romances go, I would say either When Harry Met Sally, I'm a classic. Like I just love that movie so much. And then also Amelie. Amelie is also a beautiful
yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, you did it. You answered all the questions.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much for coming talking with us. We really appreciate it. And where can people get the book and follow you on social media, all that fun stuff?
So ZOE Brennan First Crush, here it is again. It is available, anywhere books are sold. It should be, it's always at Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble has put in a big order. So if you go to Barnes & Noble, it should be there. Also,
21st, right?
Sorry?
January 21st?
Yeah, January 21st. So this, imminently from when this is being recorded. And it's available obviously on Kindle and things like that as well. And the audiobook, which I have not heard yet, but I've heard good things about, is supposed to be very good. So if you're an audiobook girly, I highly recommend the audiobooks for my books. The first one was amazing. And I'm active on Instagram at Laura Piper Lee, just my name all spelled out.
Well, very good. We'll have that all in the description. We'll have our affiliate link as well. So definitely y'all should check it out. And thanks again for coming to talk with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time chatting.
We'd like to thank Laura for coming on the podcast. This was so much fun to get to talk with her. I had a great time. And let me know what you think about other things we talked about. And if you get to read the book, let me know what you think. About all of our writer interviews. We have so much fun talking with authors and writers. And also make sure you check out our 2024 in reading episode that Bree and I did last week. That was really fun. So definitely take a look at that. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. We really appreciate that. Make sure you're following us on all the socials and follow me at Rachel's Reviews. And follow me at Rachel's Reviews. Really appreciate that all over the place, including Goodreads. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. We really, really appreciate that. We also have our Patreon group and merch store. Check that out. And thanks again to Laura. We'll talk to you later. Bye.